So what is this European Make America Great Again, or also Make Europe Great Again up to again? Ladies and gentlemen, Donald Trump has started his crazy war against Iran, which seems to be less and less planned every day, more and more spontaneous, and more unnecessary, especially since it wasn't absolutely necessary now. Even voices from Trump's administration are starting to leak out, saying that nuclear weapons weren't an imminent threat, that terrorists, or rather people who are supposed to fight against terrorists, are resigning from their positions because they can't support this unnecessary and unconstitutional war and so on. But from these libtards who for some reason are still in positions in the United States, you would probably expect them to have some kind of strange worldview, right? But what about Donald Trump's European allies? There are people who praised him, who wore red hats, who copied his style. Simply put, what does the European National Socialist or just nationalist scene, which hides behind how great a President Trump is, say about this war? Well, let's take a look at it, because if you want to know more, you'll watch this video, and let's check out this parade of loyalty. Let's start in Germany with the Alternative for Germany. So, when it comes to the Alternative for Germany, this is probably the biggest betrayal. Alice Weidel and Tino Schropala. These are the co-chairs of the Alternative for Germany, and they wrote that the renewed destabilization of the Middle East is not in Germany's interest and must end. They also warn against the collapse of Iran, which would cause mass migration to Europe. I have to say, I actually agree with the Alternative for Germany quite a lot here, because yes, that's true, it makes sense, it's a completely real risk. Besides that, of course, there's also the small problem that the conflict wasn't planned, it wasn't consulted, and it's a mess that Donald Trump created completely without reason at this moment. And now he wants us to clean up the mess. Like, screw that. Dude, screw that. I'm telling you this as a libtard European who, for some reason, agrees here with European Nazis. Specifically with the Germans. Well, yeah. That's a weird situation, isn't it? But what? Are there more Alternative for Germany representatives? For example, Trupala here also pointed out or said about Trump that Trump started as a president of peace, but he risks becoming a president of war. Overall, it could be said that Alternative for Germany condemned the American maneuvers and are calling for German neutrality in this conflict. Maybe that's also why Chancellor Friedrich Merz so strongly refused to get involved in this conflict, because TDU has long aimed to attract moderate Alternative for Germany voters. Unfortunately, of course, it's not just some fringe people in Germany who vote for the Alternative for Germany, but it's increasingly becoming a mainstream party. On the other hand, with the Alternative for Germany, there's hope that as it becomes a mainstream party, and has to distance itself from Trump and so on, it will undergo so-called mainstreamization and will become something similar to, for example, Meloni in Italy, who is the way she is, but no one can really complain that she's extremely bad or pro-Russian or fascist or anything like that. So, yeah, we'll see how it turns out in Germany in any case. This is the German reaction, the reaction of the German nationalist right to the actions of their guru in America. But what about other countries? For example, a traditional German ally in Europe, Italy. Salvini said, "Italy is not at war with Russia or Iran. Trump, don't ask us for any ships." Salvini is basically the ultimate jerk of Italian politics, but Giorgia Meloni, the one who holds the power, she also said that this doesn't concern us, even though she's close to Trump. They've been communicating for a long time, and Trump reportedly likes her quite a bit. So in this regard, it's another betrayal of European mega. What's going on? It's almost as if stupid ideas aren't popular even among nationalists. Crazy. There's a certain point where even your friends will tell you to get lost. Like, If you want to, I don't know, spray an ugly message on your principal's wall at school, your friends will support you. But if you want to set his house on fire and kill his dog, some of them will probably say, dude, that's a bit much, and they'll walk away. Some might even call the cops. So yeah, there is a certain line, and it seems that European MAGA isn't willing to cross that line. The big clown of the European MAGA scene is Britain, Nigel Farage, who first said, "We have to help the Americans open the Hormuz Strait. Britain should help the United States of America in this vital battle against Iran." But he soon changed his mind. We don't have a navy and we can't get involved in another foreign war. If we can't even defend Cyprus, then we definitely shouldn't get involved in Iran. In other words, Nigel Farage is playing both sides a little bit. On one hand, he says that Britain should help America because he wants to please Trump and his Make America Great Again fans. On the other hand, he's also trying to score points by saying, look, Britain is too weak, so right now it's not worth intervening. At that moment, Nigel Farage is basically saying, if we were strong, we would intervene. With me, we would be strong, but right now with Starmer, we're weak, so we shouldn't do it. He played this very cleverly, but at the same time, he might come across a bit like a clown. It depends on who you ask. For me, all Make America Great Again people are pretty much clowns, so it's fine. But let's continue to another great European country. That country is, of course, France, where the far right, or at this point basically just the mainstream right, is represented by Le Pen and her national rally, and of course Mr. Bardella. Le Pen, when asked about the war and, let's say, support for the entire operation in Hormuz, said, "I support the decision of the President of the Republic, that is Macron, regarding the defensive intervention in the Middle East. This war directly affects our interests. We must protect our citizens, our military bases, and help our allies." In other words, as for sending a ship to Hormuz, there was not a single word about it. She doesn't support it, she's not pushing for it, but she would be in favor of us sending some of our ships, that is, French ships, which would protect the interests of France. It's hard to say exactly what she meant by that, but what's more important is the statement from Mr. Bardelli, who is currently in the party leadership, and he says that this should be resolved diplomatically. Thank you, Mr. Bardello, thank you. I've been saying that from the beginning, exactly. It should be resolved diplomatically because this whole Hormuz charade around Iran doesn't have a military solution at this moment. There is no amount of ships or firepower that could make Hormuz operational without Iran's agreement. So let's resolve this at the negotiating table. It seems that Farah writes calls from France aren't being heard in Washington. Unfortunately, it sounds rather reasonable. Yeah, that's the word, reasonable. Overall, the situation is that the European mage Farah right, and whatever scene you want to call it, is pretty much struggling. Most of them gave some rhetorical support to the operation against Iran, but when it came to Hormuz and sending their own soldiers into this situation, they either said absolutely not, or they said, let's solve this diplomatically. Overall, they are cautious, and when they express support for Trump, it's either like, hey, let's handle this calmly, or they're tough, but tough like in Spain with Vox, which uses support for Trump more as a way to oppose Sanchez. So at that point, it's a bit of a different story, but even Vox isn't saying that Pedro Sanchez should send Spanish ships to Hormuz. In short, there is agreement across European mega-states and mega-parties that it's a bad idea, that it's simply a bad idea. And Donald Trump is really getting stabbed in the back here by his fans, by his clique in Europe, by his fifth column in Europe, which must be unpleasant, but in a way it makes sense. When you build a coalition of nationalist parties, nationalists, those who put their own nation first, you obviously can't expect them to stop putting their nation first and start collaborating with America or start doing foolish things just because their American ally wants it. That's the risk of nationalism, that everyone is just looking out for themselves and they're not willing to cooperate because cooperation is collectivist. Collectivism is an ugly, libtard, leftist, globalist crap. And on top of that, it's about Israel, and we all know very well who in Europe doesn't like Israel. Exactly. We all know that, right? Or do we not know? Anyway, just let me know in the comments who you think in Europe doesn't like Israel. And let's move on to what I want to say in conclusion. Overall, the problem with nationalism is this: it's selfish. And just like nationalist parties refuse to make a deal with Trump, even though he's their buddy, you can bet they'd abandon you in the case of NATO too if you were attacked as a European state. That's why it's worrying that nationalist parties could come to power. Because selfish nationalist parties, which let themselves be rejected in a terrible way and let their voters' opinions be influenced, since they're often extremely populist as well, would very likely completely abandon any Estonia, Poland, Finland, or the Czech Republic if it meant taking on any bigger risk. So let's try in some way to make sure that selfish people, nationalists and populists, don't win in Europe, because that threatens our very cooperation. And cooperation is the only way the human species can survive. An individual or a state in this wild world, in this jungle, is only prey for bigger predators. Only a tribe can survive. Once again, together we are strong. Do you understand? Excellent. Thank you. See you next time and take care until then. And let's laugh at how Donald Trump is suffering. Yeah, that's always funny. So that's it. Bye.